Hello, hello. Today we have our Magic Cards video for week number 12. Wide receivers, running backs, quarterbacks, tight ends, all of it. Starting off with this card here with Jameson Williams versus the Giants. Looking at the Giants defense, how are they against wide receivers in general? Adjusted to that schedule that they've played, they are 23rd. Against those outside receivers, specifically where Jamo's going to be the majority of the time, they are 19th. That primary DB, the secondary DB who's going to be on the second most, how often they're allowing those explosive pass plays, the opponent's pace, how fast is that Giants offense moving, getting the ball back to the Lions, and then the projected team total and spread at the bottom here, all important for Jameson Williams. But the one is the note that I would maybe say is the most important is the Giants run the most man coverage in the NFL. And Jameson Williams, that big play guy on the outside, he is 2 times better this year in terms of points per route against man coverage. Definitely raises his ceiling in this matchup. And what's already a good matchup overall, I would say even better at home also is important in this dome for Goff, getting him back to usual, but I'll talk about him later. Next up, we got George Pickens in this matchup that we have seen before. What is different? That's the big question. Week 1, we saw him be shadowed by Quinyon Mitchell, and CeeDee Lamb was kind of bracketed in the secondary on the opposite side. Not the greatest matchup for Pickens in general. Mitchell is a very good corner. However, there's been some changes in terms of just developments and chemistry with Dak. The first 3 games, a lot of that without CeeDee Lamb. His targets per route was about 17%. Since that point, it's closer to 25%. So a really good mark, and some of that is with CeeDee Lamb as well. It wasn't all just without CeeDee Lamb. So that volume on a per route basis has been a lot better consistently and has gotten better kind of weekly throughout the season up until where it is now, where these last 3 weeks, the targets between CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens, Pickens has 29, Lamb, 29. Basically the exact same. So I would expect the volume to still be better than 4 targets in this game. Is it a good matchup? I can't say that. However, I still think he's a play for most fantasy teams this week just because of his playmaking ability. He only needs 1 play. He can get those contested catches on Mitchell. We've seen guys perform well against Mitchell in the past, especially similar guys like a Cortland Sutton, for example, who hasn't had the greatest season, but against Quinn on Mitchell, at least in the second half, dominated. So that can give him some help there. Next up, we're going Michael Wilson, one that was the wide receiver 1, basically, last week. 18 targets, something like that, 32% target share. So they were throwing a bunch, but I wouldn't expect that to be too much different. Like we look at the passing attempts per game by Jacoby Brissett. If we're looking at just that number, then we would expect, based on his target share last week, to have 12 targets just on the average number of Brissett passing attempts in the 4 games before last week. So they're already throwing a ton. He's going to be about 60% on the outside, which is the much better matchup against Jacksonville. You see the stark difference, 14th against receivers, but 29th against the outside. He does play about 40% in the slot too, but overall will be on the outside more than 50%, which helps him. And in terms of the Cardinals defense, how are they going to be this pass-heavy team consistently? I would expect it. With Brissett in there, they're 1-4. They've allowed 27 points as a defense 4 out of 5 games. We see the spread here still underdogs right there, so I would expect another pass-heavy game for the Cardinals in general, especially with those running back injuries too. At first glance, this doesn't look like the greatest one. Like it's a bunch of yellow on Twitter. Won't be the greatest there when I can't actually talk about it, but there's actually a lot to talk about. One is the injuries. They've been really injured late. The Falcons secondary hasn't been as good. They have that really good passing defense, but as of late, hasn't been the greatest. So now they're 18th against receivers. They were closer to 10th against wide receivers in general. So they're starting to get a little bit more healthy, hopefully for their sake, but just check that injury report. The second is just the history here with Ader Terrell versus Olave. Been really good against the Falcons in the past. 2.7 yards per route. That'd be like top 5 level in terms of this season on a per route basis for Olave versus that Falcons secondary in the past. 3 straight 15-plus fantasy point days, all against Terrell. So that matches up really well for him just in the history. We go back to college. I go Ohio State Clemson, had 130 yards, 2 touchdowns. So all of that kind of favors Olave, makes it a little more confident in terms of his potential here, and is looking at the EPA per pass, taking out the game script, all that sort of stuff. The Falcons defense now is 16th, and their EPA per pass is 0.00. So literally as average as you can get. So an interesting one for Olave against Terrell. Won't be shouting him, but we'll be on him, I would say, 50% of the time. Next up is Ricky Pearsall. I went back, watched every single clip because I was sad. 3 targets, 0 catches. Wasn't really a part of the game plan, and Shanahan kind of alluded to that at halftime or after the game, which awesome of him. But confident going forward, long term, in this offense that's still a top 5 team in terms of receiving fantasy points. They don't really have that wide receiver one. He has that potential, especially that downfield potential. Definitely like that more boom bust guy for now, and we'll see how that volume goes down the line. In terms of last week, a lot of clear out routes, a lot of the verticals that he wasn't really a part of the progression, but there was also some other really good routes and opportunities there where just got a little bit unlucky. Purdy saw him late. Purdy was under pressure when he was wide open in the end zone, that sort of thing. So I think it'll be better going forward against Carolina. Still a tough matchup. Going back to that EPA per pass, they're not like this dominant passing defense. They're 24th, but they are third against receivers. Part of that is, you see down here, San Francisco touchdown favorite. So that'll be part of it, but it's not the worst matchup in the world for Pearsall. Just definitely more boom bust, I would say. Pittman, Kansas City's pass defense, looking at the numbers, surprised me and impressed me. Like, they're good, but since week one, Herbert had 3 touchdowns against them. After that point, in those 10 games, I think 10 games, 6 passing touchdowns allowed. Ridiculous. Less than a touchdown per game in terms of quarterback passing against them. So that's super impressive. Trent McDuffie won't be on him the majority of the time, so he avoids that. But overall, not the greatest matchup in the world. The targets have been a little bit more inconsistent. There's not much in the middle. It was 3 targets and then 9, 9, and 12, and then back to 2 targets. So a little bit more inconsistent. You're kind of hoping for that touchdown to go to him, but Kansas City's defense, they have been really good as of late, or really ever since week 2. And then Zay Flowers, this last one. The numbers wouldn't say tells the whole story. This 27th for explosive pass plays allowed. I really look at that because obviously that's Flowers' potential. Hasn't had a touchdown since week 1. It's eventually going to. He's not that touchdown guy, but he'll eventually break one. That sort of idea. They are 14-point favorites, but when they're projected to score 29 points, you're hoping that he's a part of that. In this Jets secondary, yeah, they're third against the outside receivers. They're 12th overall. They don't have Sauce anymore. They traded away basically their entire defense overall. There is not much. Like, these 2 corners right here have not been the guys that they were counting on or had a ton of trust in at the beginning of the season. So I overall like the potential for Flowers here. It just more so depends on, is it a blowout that he's not a part of early, because then he's kind of tough, screwed. But like we look at last year, like New England, their receivers, we don't like tout their receivers as being amazing this year. They had over 200 yards. That was the season high against the Jets. So still think it's a solid spot for Flowers. We're doing it. Talking Kenneth Walker. We're back. Maybe. Probably not. But it's getting better. Goal line work, the receiving work, slowly getting better. He's had 4 of the last 5 goal line carries, so that gives me hope. The main thing here just is that potential game script. Tennessee, last couple of weeks, they've actually been really good on the ground. 29th against the run, mainly because the Seahawks are 14-point favorites and are projected to score 27 points. So that's the main thing. And that's kind of what is the ceiling here for Kenneth Walker, is if he does get that red zone work again like he has in the last 3 games, set up really well. Simmons is back on the interior there. There is definitely a low floor here, but I do think that the ceiling is here just because of the scoring potential of this offense. And if he's getting that important work, then that'd be nice. And hopefully they're saying the truth about him getting more work just in general. That'd be beautiful just going forward. I have to start him in a double flex league this week, so we'll see how it works. Sean Tucker, after having an amazing game last week, how's it going to go now? Not the greatest matchup against the Rams. They have a pretty good defensive line. They've not allowed many explosive runs in terms of the spread. They're underdogs on the road, not really what you want from a rushing running back. Like, a lot of those routes are still going to be going to Rachaad White, and they're just really good against rushing fantasy production in general. The volume isn't incredible. Another guy that the coaches kind of said, like, hey, that volume is going to be increasing. In terms of the percent of the running back carries, I feel like that's what kind of comes down to a lot here. He had 41%, then 42%, and then 49%. So a little bit better. I would expect like 60%, hope for, even, I would say, compared to Rachaad White in this game. But overall, not the greatest matchup for Sean Tucker, but still has that touchdown potential at the goal line where you can play him if you really need a guy. Travis Etienne, a lot of this just depends on, is Bashal Tuten healthy? The volume has been incredible. Most of that has been last few weeks it was incredible, and then last week it was really only good because Tuden got injured and they just had a bunch of rushing volume in general. So I don't know if it's going to be incredible if Tuden is back in there. That's the main worry. But in general, compared to the start of the season, that Cardinals defense has been a lot worse. I talked about it with Michael Wilson earlier, how they just allowed 27 points in 4 of the last 5 games. In terms of run defense, they were kind of top 12. In the last month or so, they've kind of been bottom 12 in that rushing fantasy production. So more middle of the road on the screen, but as of late, they have not been as good. In Jacksonville, setup overall, that offense has been doing better, especially these last 2 games. They've just scored a lot of points, so that always helps too. Still getting some red zone work there, mixed in with Tuden, about 50-50. Emanuel Wilson versus Minnesota, and maybe this is Josh Jacobs. Could be healthy, who knows? But Emanuel Wilson, Minnesota's been amazing versus running backs recently, even allowing a couple touchdowns, which I feel like says a lot. When you're like allowing some touchdowns still to running backs and you're still not allowing a ton of fantasy points, that's kind of the red flag a little bit. So they're 20th against the run this year, number 1 against receiving running backs, which Wilson, not the biggest part of his game, but it's an added part of it. The big thing is just the goal line carries. Jacobs averaged the most in the NFL this season. Wilson, I don't think that's a one-to-one replacement, but they have shown that he'll be the guy down there. So you're hoping that he gets, instead of 1.7 carries per game at the goal line like Jacobs gets, maybe he gets, 1.3 in terms of the odds of him getting against the Vikings. But Vikings last month, second best against fantasy running backs, or last 5 games even. So 5 games in general, second best against fantasy running backs. So they're at home, they're favored. That defense can definitely help them against J.J. McCarthy in this opposing offense. So set up well there, but overall that defense has been improving as of late. So more so that C grade compared to being just 20th against the run. 2 fun ones in this Bengals versus Patriots game. Chase Brown at running back, one more running back, and as you see, they're number 1 against rushing fantasy production. But Brown has been incredible recently. His efficiency with Flacco has been amazing, like better than it was last year, which is awesome. In terms of this defense, though, they are basically the worst in history. That doesn't help. The receiving could help a lot in this Patriots game. So they're 20th against receiving running backs. That's where a lot of Brown's upside can be coming in. Out of the 11 games, 7 of those 11 games against the Patriots, the running backs have had 6 receptions. So with no Pirine, Brown has the number 1 fantasy volume in the NFL the last 2 weeks. A lot of that is because he is getting 100% of the receiving. So those other 4 games where the Patriots didn't allow 6 receptions to running backs, it was kind of the guys that you don't really expect that from. So I think you'll get close to that. So if you can get 5, 6, 4 even receptions in a PPR league, definitely has some value. I think he's actually a play for most leagues. Surprisingly, given that it's D- matchup, not the greatest in the world, but I think that receiving can be really nice here, where I'm not terrified of playing Chase Brown, especially with no Jamar Chase, who's that short area target. They don't really have that top tight end. Maybe a couple of these screens. They've been known to have Chase Brown split out wide, and throw him some screens. So some of those short area targets can maybe go to Chase Brown and have T. Higgins downfield on Gonzalez. And then the opposite side, not a running back, but a tight end. Hunter Henry, I don't know if I've ever seen the card like this. It's so bad. They are one of the worst defenses I've ever seen against tight ends in terms of the red zone usage. 19 fantasy points per game allowed in terms of the receiving fantasy points in the red zone. The next closest is 14. The gap between 32nd and 31st is huge. The gap between 32nd and 31st for tight end matchups is huge. And the Bengals play super fast. They're projected to score 29 points basically in this game. They're favored, but yeah, it's an A+ matchup. If you need that flyer tight end this week, I do not mind the touchdown upside one bit of Hunter Henry. I would like it better than, say, like a Kyle Pitts. Kind of the talk of the town in a way, as much as he can be, as kind of that lower level, maybe low level tight end 1 in fantasy, because he has a really good spot here with Kirk Cousins. 24% target share when Cousins has been under center. And it's not the smallest sample size, 52 passing attempts. But we've seen Pitts have really good volume spots overall. The main thing that I would make me avoid him for the most part, compared to some other tight ends, is because the touchdown upside really isn't there. And a lot of times when we're playing fantasy tight ends, That's just kind of what we're hoping for. A lot of it, it's just like, oh, they scored a touchdown, they had a good week. Oh, they didn't score a touchdown, they had a bad week. And right now, Pitts, although he's had some good days, we'll get some of those short area targets. He's had one touchdown in the year. He's not used a ton in the red zone. If Drake London's out, that would definitely improve it. But also in this Kirk Cousins offense, how confident am I that they have a bunch of red zone trips? Not super confident. And finally, two quick quarterbacks. We are just going to be focusing on both of these guys. The passing fantasy production allowed, because both the defenses that they're playing are horrible against running quarterbacks. Goff and spoiler, Matthew Stafford, they don't run. But I think this is a really good spot for Goff to get back after a rough week last week. Outside, night game, colder temperatures. He has a history of not really being as good in those spots. And also, just looking at the home road split, he comes back home this year, 19 points per game at home, 16 points per game on the road. Not the biggest difference in the world, but also throughout his entire career, consistently been that way. Career long, well, at least like last 5 years or so, or last 3, 4 years with Detroit, 21 points per game at home, 17 points per game on the road. So him being at home, even though they're big time favorites, they're projected to score 30 points, unless they just have like, 3 rushing touchdowns. I think he'll have a really good day in this spot in general. And then Matthew Stafford, like I teased, in this matchup against Tampa Bay, more middle of the road in terms of that passing production. They have really good pressure. So that's the main thing. The Rams have done a great job at protecting Stafford. Part of the reason why he's been so good is because that's kind of how you affect Stafford more so than other quarterbacks even, is that pressure. So they have really good pressure. That's kind of like the one negative, but overall set up pretty solid besides that. In his last 7 games, he scored 25 fantasy points in 5 out of those 7 games. Again, this offense is cooking. 28 points is their projection for the week. Has some potential always with those receivers. So if they're healthy, he's healthy. A lot of teams should be starting him. He's not that elite fantasy quarterback, I would say, even after the production he's had of late. But still, you can't ignore 25 points in 5 of the last 7 games for Stafford. So still, decent spot there. If you guys have any questions, comments about matchups, anything like that, leave it in the comments. I'll come answer them, and I'll see you guys soon. Thanks.